Texas and started and built a successful company.
That I take this obligation freely.
And it would continue when he was elected to Congress, selected to serve as UN ambassador, an emissary to mainland China, and later run the CIA. The more you learn how George Bush came this far, the more you realize that perhaps no one in this century is better prepared to be President of the United States.
So help you God, so help me God.
In New York, we do 4 or 5 domestic political campaigns here in the United States each year. This year, Pat Moynihan, Ted Wilson, who's running for governor of Utah, Bill Gray, who's running for the Senate up in Vermont, and Rosemary Pooler here in New York running for Congress.
I described you as one of the producers of the television spots for the Dukakis campaign. Are there others, and how do they relate to each other?
Well, we're all independently working. Certainly David Doak, Bob Shrum, Bob Squire, Michael Kay at one point, although no longer, Ed McCabe, Carl Kasman, Mal McDougall. There have been a number. Dan Payne, Ken Swope, and several others.
All right, Mr. Miller, we're going to show 2 spots back to back. They have code words, and I guess all of them do. They're kind of the jargon used by your profession. They're called plant closing, and that's for sure. Do you have something to say about those before we put them on?
These ran in August. One plant closing ran in Texas, and it's a Dukakis-Bentsen spot. The second one is a Democratic National Committee spot done by Mal McDougall and Carl Kasman that ran nationally.
All right, we're going to show them. We'll be back in 1 minute.
The company you work for shuts down. Your job, your security gone. Shouldn't there be a law to give you and your community 60 days notice? George Bush says no, and Dan Quayle led the fight in the Senate against making it a law. But understanding a community's needs is what Michael Dukakis is all about. That's why he passed one of the first laws in the country providing notification of plant closings. And that's one reason he chose Lloyd Bentsen, a man who won the fight to make 60-day notification law. Who cares about your life? The choice is clear.
I voted for the Republicans, but that doesn't make me a Republican. Republicans haven't been voting for me, and that's for sure. They're against health care. Now my folks can't afford to get sick. They're against student loans. My kids can't afford to go to college. They're against daycare. My wife can't afford to work. They're against affordable housing. Now we can't find a decent place to live. Now they want me to vote Republican. I can't afford to be a Republican. I think it's time to check out those Democrats.
Scott Miller, is either one of those a negative ad?
I suppose by the description that most people would put to it among journalists, I'd say the first one is. It presents certainly information that's negative to Dan Quayle and George Bush. It happens to be factual, it happens to be comparative, but most people would call that a negative ad.
Those were both 30-second spots. Can you generalize about the cost of producing one of those?
No, I think they'd be quite different. I would say the average spot in a campaign is around $10,000.
To make?
Yes.
And then what about paying for it? Are they all played nationally?
No, not all, no, regionally as well.
How do you decide?
I don't.
Who does?
That's decided by John Sasso.
Uh-huh. What's your role in it? Just the production of the spot?
Yes, just the production. John's in charge of strategy, and the campaign is in charge of the research that develops the strategy.
Mm-hmm. What creative role does a producer have? Are you given a theme and then have to come up with it, or do they script you a little bit more?
No, they give us the strategy and then ask us to script and produce from that.
Sounds like fun.
It can be fun, yeah, sure.
We've got another spot, this one called Taking Charge, just the one. And let's show it, and we'll get your comments about it as soon as we're done. Taking Charge coming up next.
Leadership. It's taking charge, taking responsibility. Michael Dukakis balanced 10 budgets in a row and still cut taxes 5 times. Leadership. It's making life better. He increased working people's income at twice the national rate and pioneered the first universal health care program in the country. And that's why America's governors, both Democrat and Republican, voted Michael Dukakis the most effective governor in the nation. Michael Dukakis for president. Let's take charge of America's future.
I have a note that this one ran after the convention, of course. For one thing, it included convention footage, and it was designed to have a positive tone. Did it achieve what you saw it?
Yeah, it was just a very straightforward biographical ad that ran at a time that people were very curious for information about Governor Dukakis. They needed to know what he'd done and how he defined leadership, and that's in terms of accomplishment.
Do you think viewers distinguish between commercials and news, and how much of a production is designed to look like news?
I think some of the productions are meant to look like news, but viewers are very sophisticated and distinguish between the two, and they're very cynical about broadcast advertising for political campaigns, as well they should be. They know they're seeing just one side, and they know they're seeing one side's very pointed view, and they take it as that. They don't take it as the gospel. Neither do they take the news as gospel, and neither should they. But they accept the information, they factor it, and then they compare it to what they hear on television, what they hear on the radio, what they see in the papers and read in magazines, and what they hear from their friends and from people they respect in word of mouth. So they sort of factor it into a huge field and an environment of information, and then make their decisions from it. But advertising is a part of it, but it's a part that they're very sophisticated about watching.
I do want to tell the audience we are going to take some calls. We'll put the numbers up on the screen for you, and I hope we can do it right now. But we also want to get as many of these spots in as possible, in part because we don't want to show any more Republican spots than we do Democratic spots before this entire evening is over. And if we get everybody on the way we planned, then we'll have achieved our political balance. Scott Miller, we're now going to go to a minute package of 2 half-minute ads called Chairman and Blackboard. And why don't you speak to who produced each, if you know. Offhand, do you know about these? I have a note that these are both negative ads.
Bruce, these code words are so secret that even I don't know the code words. I haven't got a clue what they are, but when you run them,
let's run them, and maybe we'll ring some bells. Taking Charge is coming up. Chairman is the first one, and Blackboard is next.
George Bush was chairman of a federal task force to stop drug traffic. Cocaine traffic went up by 400%. Drug-related deaths doubled. He talked tough in public. But in private, we were dealing with General Noriega, the Panamanian drug lord. And now George Bush says he'll be tough on drugs. We don't need any more talk. In his state, Michael Dukakis got results. 5 times as many drug offenders in jail. High school drug use down by 15%. Michael Dukakis, the best America is yet to come. For 7.5 years, George Bush supported cutbacks in American education. He even sat by while college loans for working families were cut. And now, suddenly, George Bush says he'll be the education president. Michael Dukakis won't just give us slogans. He's committed to a new national college loan program to make sure that any American kid can afford to go to college. Michael Dukakis for president. A real commitment to education. The best America is yet to come.
Scott Miller, did you have a role in the production of those?
Yeah, both of those. Those are both negative ads going right at George Bush. George Bush has tried to make a lot out of crime in this campaign and made himself out to be this enormous crime fighter, a guy who's right there, the tough sheriff of America. And this is a guy who had a role as a peace officer, if you want to call it that, as head of the President's Task Force on Drug Interdiction. And I think we all know what happened over the last 8 years. You know, cocaine traffic itself up by 300%. Drug and drug-related crime running wild in the country. And all this time, a deal with General Noriega being made on the government payroll. Yeah, we wanted to point that out. I mean, you know, he's done his spots about the furlough program and Willie Horton. Well, Willie Horton was never on the government payroll, and certainly General Noriega was.
Where does radio fit into this? When you produce TV, do you produce a companion radio spot?
Quite often, yes. Radio is targeted more locally and regionally.
Can you offer a judgment as to the effectiveness of each?
They're both effective in their own way. I think they're different media, and they run at different, you know, in different ways. And of course, you can't get the same message effect with radio as with television. And the preponderance of both media budgets, I'm sure the Bush and Dukakis are in television. The electronic media, though, dominate. Radio is important, but it can be regionalized and targeted much more locally. So it has that use and is being used very much that way by state campaigns, both on the Republican and Democratic side right now.
Let me clarify. You made clear that you were the producer of spots. Do you have any role in the buying decisions and the timing?
No, no, we don't.
And that's left to the political people?
In Boston, yes.
Okay. Do you consider yourself a political person?
Yes, I'm a partisan. I'm a Democrat.
All right. I want to show another set of spots. These, the code words are, and I don't know any other way to describe these, so I'm going to stick with this approach. Failed and crunch. And these are described as...
Failed would go for a lot of the jobs that George Bush had over the last 7 years, but we'll have to see which one we're referring to.
And crunch, I think, is referring to the environment and Social Security.
Yeah, okay.
They're both half a minute. Let's see those.
For 7.5 years, George Bush personally weakened regulations on corporate polluters, failed to push for the cleanup of toxic waste sites, twice supported the veto of the Clean Water Act, and opposed a ban on ocean dumping. And now suddenly George Bush tells you he's going to be the environmentalist president. Do you believe that? The League of Conservation Voters doesn't either. They gave George Bush a D rating, and they endorsed Michael Dukakis for president, because the best America is yet to come. George Bush sat by while his administration tried to cut $200 billion out of Social Security. In fact, in 1985, George Bush personally cast the tie-breaking Senate vote to cut $20 billion in benefits. And now suddenly George Bush tells you he's on your side. He didn't vote for you. Why should you vote for him? Vote for the man you know will protect Social Security and make sure it's there for you when you need it. Michael Dukakis for president. The best America is yet to come.
Scott Miller, anything to add?
Yeah, Bruce, actually the three ads, the education ad, environmental ad, and the Social Security were of one package. And they were really meant to call attention not to George Bush's flip-flops, but really that for 7.5 years he'd been very consistently on one side of an issue. And then in this election year of 1988, he made a sudden conversion, and we were just asking, did he suddenly see the light, or did he suddenly see the polls and decide he must be an environmentalist and suddenly be for education and suddenly say that he's on the side of America's elderly, whereas that certainly was not where he was for 7 years.
All right, let's take our first phone call. Atlanta, Georgia. Go ahead, please.
Yes, my name's Cal. I'm just looking at the program, and I'd like to ask the guy there, well, being black, I think it would be good for Dukakis to do more ads with, say, one with Jesse Jackson or some other minority leaders to try and get that vote. And I'm also very happy to say that I'm happy to see that Bush is finally being presented in the light that he is being shown what he's been for the past 8 years. I think also that you should investigate that article in Mother Jones that told of Bush and how he had a hands-off management style in the CIA, which Ronald Reagan has had for the past 8 years, and we've got Iran-Contra and Southern Arms to Ayatollah. He didn't even know about it, so we're going to expect the same from Bush. And this stuff should also be investigated.
Okay, sir. Thank you. Atlanta, Georgia. Scott Miller, do you have a reaction?
If Bush would promise to be hands-off the CIA, I'd be a lot happier than thinking he had his hands on it. But I'm afraid that wasn't the case. No, I think that there's a campaign being done, particularly with black leaders by Frank Mingo and his group. I think a terrific one, which says stand up for what America stands for. It really says let's see to it that American values are voted for, and does use Jesse Jackson and other leaders. And if it's not being shown in Atlanta, it should be, and I hope you'll see it.
Do you think it would be placed nationally?
Yes, oh, absolutely.
All right. Let's go back to the phone. Kinston, North Carolina. North Carolina, you're on the air.
Okay, yes. I'm wondering, is it that the Republican Party has more money to dish out in ads, because I see more of George Bush and Quayle, and it's really promoted them. But Dukakis-Bentsen and just beginning now to sort of pick up. Is it that you're trying to get the more attention at the latter stages of the campaign?
Well, my guess is the Republicans have slightly more money, but not a lot more. It may be that there's not as much money allocated in North Carolina, which would be too bad, because that's a good Democratic state. I'd be happy if the Republicans would run ads with Dan Quayle all over the country. They haven't. Nobody can find Dan Quayle since the last debate. He's been on a bus, I think, somewhere in Canada, driving around, and they haven't let him out of the cage. But I really don't think that there's any reason why there should be less going on in North Carolina, and particularly there. That's an important state for the Democrats and a progressive state, and a good one for the Democrats. You should be seeing close to an equal amount. I imagine both budgets are pretty near equal.
Scott Miller, you referred to the packaging ads. We're going to show them now.
Okay.
Called How Many More and Flag, and they're each 30 seconds. We'll be back in 1 minute.
Well, I think we need another TV commercial on this furlough thing.
No way. They're beginning to write about Dukakis' real crime record.
Look, nobody reads anymore.
Let's hope not. Look, first of all, Dukakis changed that furlough program. Now look at this. More cops on the street. More drug offenders behind bars. Crime down 13% in Massachusetts.
Just what I mean. How long do you expect to get away with this furlough thing?
How many more weeks till the election, Bernie?
They'd like to sell you a package. Wouldn't you rather choose a president?
In the debate, Dukakis said 37 million Americans don't have health insurance. That's not true, is it?
Afraid so. And Dukakis came up with that health insurance plan for working people.
It's going to play real well with the middle class. We get enough problems with the middle class.
So what does Bush do?
Wraps himself up in the American flag.
Not that again.
Would you rather talk about Dukakis' health insurance plan? Get out the flag, boys.
They'd like to sell you a package. Wouldn't you rather choose a president?
Scott Miller, did these work?
Yes, it did, in terms of refocusing the dialogue in the campaign, getting people talking and focusing on the campaign and these issues, and particularly talking about this fact of George Bush's very careful packaging and the very careful packaging of Dan Quayle as well.
Next call, Palm Desert, California. Go ahead, please.
Yes, thank you for C-SPAN. We are so grateful that you keep us in track and at least give us an unbiased input. You know, a few weeks ago, the Democrats out in the population accused the Republicans of trying to monopolize C-SPAN call-in programs. And I watched the C-SPAN program this morning with Brian and the three foreign, or not, it wasn't Brian, it was...
It was with Kerry Collins.
Yeah, it was Terry, and with the three foreign journalists. You know, the first particular bunch of calls were from anti-Bush. So I guess we can cancel that it is not being monopolized by Republicans.
Tell you what, do you have a question about any of this political advertising?
Yes, I do.
Sure, go ahead.
I'd like to ask him, in the advertisements that they're putting out for education, I've put 3 children through education. I worked. I saved. I put everything aside. I did not have any help at all. But it was important to me that they be educated. Now, Mr. Dukakis thinks that this should come out of my tax dollars after I've already educated mine. And I want the rest of the American people sitting out there that buy boats, buy motorhomes, drink their beer, smoke their cigarettes and pot and cocaine to save their money like I did.
Laura, do you have a question for Mr. Miller?
You betcha. I want to know how Dukakis is going to figure out how to do this.
All right, thank you. Scott Miller?
Well, first of all, I congratulate her for working hard to put her kids through school and see to it that they got an education and caring about it and really putting the effort into putting the money behind it. And I think all American people should do that. But I think the American government, as the American people, should get behind it too, and so does Michael Dukakis. And if that takes an investment, we got to make that investment, because that's the only way we're going to stay competitive in the world. That's the only way we're going to have a better country. And I'm glad that she did it, but I think, as she well knows, she's not representative of the broad population. Not all people have the time or the money to do what she's done, and a lot of people are just struggling to get by, and they need help, and they deserve help. And if we're going to have the kind of America that we can have, then we're going to have an America that cares about education, and then we're going to need a president who cares about it and does something about it, and that's what Michael Dukakis is going to do, and that's why we've been talking about education.
Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Go ahead, please.
Yes, if I know the sleaziness of the George Bush campaign, I want to doubt it before the end of the election. They do some commercials about abortion, and I wish you guys would attack him by saying, well, 6 to 8 years that Reagan's been president, the Republicans controlled the United States Senate, and there's not one bill that passed that Republican-controlled Senate. And what kind of wimp is George Bush? Because he was like the presiding officer of the United States Senate.
Okay.
I mean, they believe so much in symbolism, like wrapping themselves around the flag. Why couldn't they give a message if they're so, anti-abortion? Why couldn't they pass a bill in that Senate? And, like I said, why, George Bush couldn't convince that Republican-controlled Senate to pass a bill?
Okay, sir. Scott Miller, what are the chances that there will be an abortion ad on the Dukakis side?
It's simply not. I mean, I think because of the limited time on television, limited budgets, we're going to stick to the economic issues, the issues of the middle class squeeze, and the issues of keeping America #1 in the world. Abortion's an important issue, but it's an issue of values and feelings, and I think that George Bush has said how he feels very clearly, whether or not he's been able to be effective about how he feels, and Michael Dukakis has said clearly and honestly how he feels, and people can decide for that. I don't think either one of them need to broadcast their feelings. They're well known.
Later on, we're going to have Janet Mullins on to talk about the paid media on the other side, and I'm going to ask her this question too, and let me put it to you. That is, the front page of the Washington Post this morning has a 4-column headline that says, "Campaign ads play fast and loose with the truth. Bush, Dukakis TV commercials often make misleading or false statements about records." Your comment?
Well, the other night on television they compared a couple of ads, an ad that we did about Social Security, the one you just saw, Crunch, and an ad that Bush had done about defense. In the Bush ad, they pointed out, I had to write down, there were so many lies in it. They said that Dukakis was against the stealth bomber. He's for the stealth bomber. They said he's against the Trident II missile, and he's for it. They said he's against nuclear attack subs. He's for them. They said he's against the advanced tactical fighter. He's for it. They said he was opposed to Libyan Grenada actions, and he was not. And then to compare that, to say that we were just as sleazy as they were, they said in that Social Security ad, the Democrats said that Bush had voted against benefits for Social Security beneficiaries, and when in reality he had simply voted to freeze their benefits. And so I think, yes, we were apparently inaccurate in that, but the level of inaccuracy no way compares to what the Republicans have done on a regular basis and constantly. Yes, there's been a lot of mishandling of the truth. The truth's been dragged through the gutter and trampled. There's been just an incredible amount of hypocrisy.
All right. Let's take another call, Scott Miller. Des Moines, Iowa. Go ahead, please. You're on the air.
Yes. I have a nonpartisan comment and a question. I think it would be interesting to see the percentage of Bush campaign money that's spent on ads that highlight Bush as the theme of the ad, and also vice versa, the percentage of Dukakis campaign dollars spent on ads that feature Dukakis as the theme of the ad. I actually feel that the campaign finance law should be changed to say that those dollars can only be spent featuring one's own ticket. And I would like to hear Scott's comments on this. Also, I'd like to know in that regard if they really feel they can win any election highlighting the other candidate. We had a governor's election here in Iowa that was lost precisely because of that all the money in the one campaign was spent counterpunching to the other party. And there was, it was very clear that that's why that election went the way it did. And it was a landslide in the direction of the one party being the only party that got any media coverage, because both parties were spending their money on on the same guy. One's ads were supposed to be negative, and the others, of course, were sponsored positive.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you. Des Moines, Iowa. Scott Miller.
Well, I think it's a good comment. I think her suggestion that the candidates be limited to only characterizing their own issues and their own ideas might be a good one. But you got to remember, this is an election that's a contest. It's a competition, and it's a competition between partisans. We're not journalists. We're not trying to put out simply an objective view. We're saying what we believe and how strongly we feel for our candidate and against the other guy, and we do feel those things strongly. It's a part of politics, it always has been, as long as there are two men running against each other, that they're going to contrast their views and contrast the issues and contrast their records. How they do that and when they do that and where they do that is open for discussion. I think her suggestion is a very good one for electronic media in the 30-second format, is that they only be allowed to characterize themselves and their own issues and their own records and let the people decide. That's a nifty idea.
We've been talking to Scott Miller, the media consultant to the Dukakis-Bentsen campaign and a producer of several of the Dukakis television spots. Mr. Miller, we're going to continue and show a few more of these. The next set of two, which will be about a minute in total, is one called Oval Office and another one called Crazy. And I have a note that these are negative ads about Senator Quayle. Anything to say before we show them?
Nope.
All right, let's run them.
The most powerful man in the world is also mortal. We know this all too well in America. 1 in 5 American vice presidents has had to rise to the duties of commander-in-chief. 1 in 5 has had to take on the responsibilities of the most powerful office in the world. For this job, after 5 months of reflection, George Bush made his personal choice, J. Danforth Quayle. Hopefully, we will never know how great a lapse of judgment that really was.
We got a disaster on our hands.
After all that rehearsal, I thought we had Quayle totally programmed.
Not totally.
Suddenly the words President Quayle even make me nervous.
Benson looked great.
You know, what if... It's too crazy.
What is it?
Is it too late to drop him? Bring in Bob Dole.
Yeah, Dole. Yeah.
You're right, it's too crazy.
It's not that crazy. Rosemary.
They'd like to sell you a package. Wouldn't you rather choose a president?
You produced these?
Yes, I did.
Anything to say about them?
Just that the words President Quayle still make me nervous.
What is the lifespan of an ad? How can you tell whether it's going to run the whole campaign, or are they designed to run for short periods of time?
They're really designed to run for short periods of time. I don't think any political ad that I've ever seen has had a chance to wear out. They really run for less than a week quite often. And they're tested very carefully. There's a lot of tracking done on a day-to-day basis, so they really know if they're effective or not, and they're tested before they're put on the air.
Tested by telephone poll?
Both by telephone poll and by qualitative research, focus groups, that kind of thing, in-depth interviews.
Today's New York Times reports that both parties are saving up a lot of their money for a final television blitz, as they describe it. What are we going to be seeing in the last 2 weeks in terms of television spots for the campaigns?
Well,
the quantity really is what I'm talking about.
A lot. You're going to be seeing a lot besieged, but you know, when you recognize that in the last debate, 62 million Americans tuned in, which was far beyond the expectations of any of the experts. The 62 million was the same number that had tuned in for the first debate, and really, I think probably a larger number of people than had voted in 1984. So the American people are still very much focused on this campaign, still looking for information, still searching to make a decision, no matter what the polls say. The softness of that vote, the amount of undecided, they're still looking for information. So although they're going to be deluged with political spots, I think for a great many people it's going to be the last 2 weeks that they're going to be making that decision.
Any idea, or can you tell us, what the total television budget for the Dukakis-Bentsen campaign is?
No, I'm sorry, I don't know, Bruce.
Can you guess as to what proportion of that budget your company receives to produce these things?
Oh, to produce it? Oh,
yeah.
Very, very little. Tiny amount.
Like 1%, 6%?
Oh, no, I couldn't guess. But, I mean, it's a tiny, tiny fraction to produce. The cost of production is very low compared to the cost of running a spot.
We're going to succeed in getting all of the ones that we planned on during your segment, and the next two are called Real Answers and Family Education. Again, about, well, these are about a minute each. Mm-hmm. We'll show those now.
As a nation, 212 years old, we're very young, but we're getting out of shape. Instead of being the world champions in international markets, we're now second or third. Instead of leading the world in education, we're 6th or 7th. Instead of people owing us, we owe them. How did we let this happen? Well, I think instead of looking for new answers, we went with the old ones. Instead of doing the right thing, we began doing the easy thing. And now we're in danger of falling behind. I'm not going to let that happen. I won't let our proud young nation spend the next 4 years sitting on the couch. I believe the best America is yet to come. It's been a few years since Kitty and I had children in school. But when we were raising our family, we didn't have the worries that most young parents have today. Daycare, for example, wasn't a daily challenge. Drugs weren't such a threat to our children. Today, it seems young parents have less time and a lot more to worry about. To stay even, most families have to have 2 working parents, and it's still not even. And now the Republicans say that the future's never been brighter. But if I were a young father today, I'd want to know that my government wasn't blind to the changes in my life. I'd want my new president to be in touch with the things that are important to me and to my family. That's not a Democratic concern. It's not a Republican concern. That's a father's concern.
Scott Miller, that last spot that we saw was nicknamed, at least on my list, Family Education. What was the message you were trying to get across in that spot?
Well, Bill Heater shot that spot, but the message is clearly not just what Michael Dukakis is going to do about education. I think that's pretty clear. I mean, people have heard about his plan for a national scholarship program for young people so that all young people have a chance, equal chance, to get into college and get a college education and then pay it back. That student loan program is just one of the ideas that he's come forward with. But this is not just about what he's going to do, but why he's going to do it, the values that drive him, the feelings and emotions that are really behind his stand on education. Most Americans know that he would do more for education than George Bush. This really shows the conviction behind that.
I know you haven't read the column, but George Will wrote a column about this ad. He said he watched it, and after it was over, he asked himself, what does it mean? Can you be more specific? How do you respond to that kind of a criticism?
I think when it comes to education, all Republicans say, what does it mean? I don't get it. That's what they've been doing for 7 years. We want to change that. I think that's what George Will did. I don't, seriously, I think that's obviously his opinion about it. These spots are fairly thoroughly researched, and they're researched particularly for their ability to communicate a message, and they've certainly done that. Whether or not people accept it or like it or agree with it, that's another matter. But whether it got through, that's pretty well documented.
Here's a philosophical question. Do you think that an average voter who gets all his or her information about the candidates from the television spots of each is a sufficiently informed voter?
Well, there's no such thing as an average voter who gets all their information from television spots, and they wouldn't be sufficiently informed, and that's not the way the American people make their decisions. They do watch television, they watch the news, they watch interview programs, they do watch the paid advertising, but they also read the newspaper, they talk to their friends, they think about it, they make their own decisions. This is a country of very independent thinking people, and people who form their opinions in a thinking way, and then people who are fairly sophisticated about this stuff. And it's naive to think that they would only watch television and make their decisions by that.
Are all the TV ads that we're going to see as viewers, potential voters, already been produced for this campaign?
No, absolutely not.
How quickly can you create an ad campaign? Let's say if there's a development in the campaign this afternoon.
We'd be on tomorrow. You'll see. You showed the quail spots, and they were done on an overnight basis, obviously. Tune in tonight, and you'll see a spot that was done yesterday evening, responding to not so much to the one particular Bush ad, but to the character of the Bush campaign and the nature of the lies and distortions that have been told, and an attempt to get right back at the truth again and get the truth back on track.
Are there a series of ads or even a single ad in the can ready to be released just before the campaign or just before the election?
I can't say.
Do you know?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much, Scott Miller, media consultant to the Dukakis-Bentsen campaign and a producer of some of those spots, for a very informative segment. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Bruce.